Welcome everyone to the Startup UCLA Summer Accelerator program. My name is Robert Gitlin, and I'm the director of the Accelerator. And today we're really excited to welcome Todd Gitlin from Safire Partners, who's going to be doing a talk on advisory boards. And with that, I will go ahead and have Todd come up here. Thank you, Todd.
Cool. Is that just for the camera? Or so this will do it?
You're
so I don't
good.
need that.
Yeah, you're covered.
Okay. I was online. So it's really good to be at USC's Startup Center. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You guys are much, much bigger than USC. I grabbed some stats. You have 1,800 inventions, 350 medical centers, $1 billion in annual research funding. So this is the place to be, not USC. But there is a quiz at the beginning part of this. And I'll introduce myself in a second because the joke kind of goes in line with me giving you some data about UCLA. Do you guys know what technical innovation happened at UCLA that was one of the greatest achievements of the internet of all time? ARPANET was what it was called, and what was ARPANET responsible for? Email. The first email. Connected to what other college campus? Right. On October 29th, 1969, Len Kleinrock sent the first email from here. And I think almost everybody's company either had something to do with an email or an internet company or content associated to the bandwidth and the network that we've created. So, I mean, this is the beginning. As Robert shared, my name's Todd Gitlin. I own a firm called Safire Partners. Safire is my mother's maiden name. Most recruiters name their firms after themselves. I own an executive search firm. It's a Southern California based. Go back. So we're Southern California based. We take on executive level search only. We work with emerging companies, and we'll get to a little bit more about us, but because my slides are a little out of order. Today we'll talk about us. I'll go back to that in a second. I want to have a conversation with you guys about advisory boards, how it's a very underused tool at an emerging company level, how that board changes over time, how we compensate that board, and how we build and recruit talent to your board. So back a little bit. So Safire Partners, my firm, I've got 10 people. We work with emerging growth companies. We take on 60 executive searches a year. We only work with companies based in Southern California. And every year I personally put about $1 million of my fees and or writing a check back into the marketplace as an angel investor. So I've got 32 investments that I've made since 2006. Some of the exits that we've had are Outlook, Rubicon, TrueCar, Cognition, Ironclad Performance Wear. And some of them are up there, but you can quickly see a basis of kind of who we work with. We recruit for boards of directors, CEOs, COOs, GMs, co-founders, heads of sales, heads of marketing, heads of product, heads of engineering, heads of finance, heads of business development. So I quickly wanted to just walk you through the process that we go through as we execute a retained search, partly because we're going to get back to this at the end, as you guys are going to be building advisory boards using some of these same methodologies and practices. And the one thing you'll realize, and you're probably already starting to realize that, is that as you start and run a company, your principal concern is recruiting. You need talent. You need an idea, you need capital, and you need people. And the idea, spinning off from either corporate spinoffs, divestitures, innovation labs, your own way of thinking, needs to somehow find capital, venture capitalists, banks, working capital. But ideas and capital, money's still green, and if you're the only one with an idea, you're probably a little too early to the market. The people are your biggest variable. An A player can take a mediocre idea and little to no capital and make a fantastic business. So Google raised $30 million in their Series A round of capital with Sequoia and Kleiner, and they had $30 million left of venture capital by the time they got to their IPO. They didn't use a single dime of that money. So the way that we find people, so the process of a retained search, and there's different levels of recruiting. There's retained search, where you're activating on the front end a research project that helps you identify the market. There's contingent search, which is a recruiter that works on performance only, that will send you any candidate that they have on hand, which is usually a reflection of job postings. And then there's internal search, which you guys at your own company will be building your own recruiting teams and processes, whether it's the hiring managers or an actual recruiter. But we're at the higher end of that, which is retained search. So what we do is we build databases. That database has companies, titles, years, and location. So we're going to look at 300 to 500 companies. So in Southern California, we have e-commerce, ad tech, mobile, software, digital media. For instance, let's choose digital media. If you were an online video site, Machinima, Machinima, Fullscreen, Zephyr, Channel Factory, Maker Studios, which just sold for $950 million to Disney, Awesomeness, which just sold for $110 million. As your principal concern is how do you deliver media over the internet using YouTube as a platform, you need to figure out what companies you likely want to recruit from. So you can obviously look at the other networks, the other studios. You can look at emerging platforms like Hulu and Netflix, and you could look at other video platforms like Roku and Boxy and TiVo. But once you identify the companies you want to see, and that's an important part for every single person in this room to know, whether you're working with a recruiter or whether you're doing it on your own, and as it relates back to the advisory board, what companies do you want to see talent from? That should be a file you keep in your Gmail, in your drafts function, or in an Excel file that you're constantly opening up, and you're always adding to that. So based on the particular search, let's just say we were doing a CFO search, which we did a CFO search for both Maker Studios and Machinima. The CFO could be called VP of Finance, Controller, Chief Accounting Officer, and all the different variations. Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis, Vice President of Strategy sometimes. Sometimes they're even called COO because they have a broader scope. So once you know the companies and the titles, you have to figure out what years they held that title, and you'd also look at location. So LinkedIn has democratized this data. LinkedIn is not always kept up to date, so it's not your only source of data. But once you collect that data, 300 to 500 companies, once you collect, the way that this works actually, you look at about 100 companies, you look at 7 to 10 variations of a title, you go back 5 to 7 years, and you would look across whatever locations. If you wanted to localize the search to Southern California, you can go nationally. That would produce 300 to 500 names. You then have to go through all of those names. You review and rank them to get to the top list. Basically going through everybody's profile saying yes or no. If they're a yes, you then put them in the search to be contacted. And then when you're contacting them, you have to get them interested. You have to identify whether or not they're affordable. You have to figure out whether or not they're available. You have to identify whether or not they're local. You know, just in LA alone, our city goes out, not up. LA's got 10 million people in LA County with 88 different cities that each have their own mayor, right? So we were built when they brought water to the desert in 1912 when Mulholland brought the aqueduct in. So we go out, not up. We don't have a center like Chicago, Austin, Houston. We don't have a homogeneous nature to our community like Silicon Valley, which is 90 miles from Santa Cruz to Marin. We are massive. So local defines itself just when you're talking about, can you drive to my office, not do you live in LA? And then lastly, are you qualified? And qualified is the most important metric out of the bunch, but these are all important as it relates to generating a prioritized list of 3 to 7 candidates. So that's what we do. We go through this process for a company. If we don't identify the right 3 to 7 candidates, we're changing the filter: interested, affordable, available, local. We're relocating candidates. We're changing the compensation structure. We're going after them with a different pitch. We're readjusting the position spec. We're looking at how they fell out. And if we can't do that, we have to go back and change the companies. So we can't reinvent candidates at the executive level. So that's the process of an executive search. So what's important to understand as we start to talk about advisors is how an executive who would bring with them some sort of brand to your company, some sort of talent base, some sort of access to capital, some sort of knowledge base, how an executive thinks about their career. Because an advisory position is a portfolio effect inside of their career. So this being the executive, and to their companies, they're an employee. So an executive can be an advisor, they can be an investor, they could be on a board, and they could be a founder of a company. So these are the 5 ways to play. A consultant doesn't quite fit there, as a consultant's not a permanent appendage to your company. Consultants don't operate under the same need to build political capital and social equity within a company. So that's why where a consultant's not up there. But this is how they're thinking about their career. So as you're approaching them with Fresh, sorry to pick on you, but it was an easy name to remember. As you're approaching them with Fresh, a fashion discovery site that ultimately leads towards increased commerce, you're going to want people from the fashion industry. You're going to want people from the mobile industry. You're going to want people from the digital media sector. You're going to want people that understand affiliate and e-commerce platforms. You'll have to first figure out the target companies, but the people that are working at those companies are trying to reverse engineer how they want to reach out to startups too. So again, you're part of their equation. So that executive, as they build a portfolio, is going to be working as an executive for 2 to 3 companies over a 10-year cycle. They're going to be an advisor for 10 to 20 companies over that same period. That means they're going to pick 2 to 3 advisory deals. A lot of the advisors you find might be the first time they've ever done an advisory deal, and we'll get into that later. But this is on average. If they will have founded one company, if not as a full-time founder, as a chairman, once every 10 years. They will have invested in 1 to 5 companies, and they will have served on the board of directors. And again, these are the highest quality CEOs, CFOs, CTOs of 1 to 5 companies. So on the low end, the people that you're going to be talking to, when they're looking at their career, they're working with 15 companies in every 10 years. On the higher end, they're working with 34. 34 is a lot more common to see on a Silicon Valley, Bay Area resume. 15 is a lot more common to see on a Southern California-based resume. If I don't see an executive that has an advisor position on their LinkedIn or on their resume, it draws concern to me. Because there's more to it than just you guys calling them up. There's their ability to be able to expose themselves to an ecosystem of relationships, an ecosystem of new ideas. So they need you just as much as you need them to ultimately build the career that's going to get me or a venture capitalist or a CEO that's looking to hire them interested in their company or in their background. So there's 6 things we can offer. And by the way, if there's ever anything you want me to slow down on, slow down. And then when we get through this, we'll do a little Q&A. There's 6 things you can offer a person targeting any company, whether it's executive, founder, investor, board seat, or advisor. And one of them is brand. Brand I just quickly talked about. When I look at their LinkedIn, when a CEO is looking at their LinkedIn, it's important that they have more to their exposure than just vice president of product at Google. They're also looking for relationships. The advisory pool of companies that they're working with, and that's why it indexes higher, 10 to 20 over a given decade, is that they're looking for, these are most likely the companies that they're going to be joining. Cash and equity is another value trigger. Obviously, that's a little easier to understand. The ability to learn. So exposing themselves to social, mobile, video emerging technologies when they're potentially at a internet browser-based solution only. So let's just say they're the COO of Huffington Post, acquired by AOL for $300 million plus a few years ago. The exposure that they have as COO is highly focused on browser-based applications and content solutions. And they're light on getting to YouTube, onto mobile, iOS and Android via apps, and social. Now, they probably wouldn't be light on all 3 of those. So they're going to look to build a portfolio, and in that portfolio of advisory relationships, of advisory opportunities, the ability to learn and trade data with you is going to be a factor of compensation. So you might give them no money. They might never work at your company because they're based in New York and you're in LA, and you're trading on their brand, which is the COO of Huffington Post is on your advisory board, and you're trading information with them. You're teaching them metrics and factors that they might not have been able to acquire otherwise. Another factor of compensation is legacy, which factors in a lot more when you're dealing with a nonprofit or you're dealing with a business that's trying to change the world. Not every business has that. But if you have that component, you're selling it. And then fun and fulfillment. So there's really no order to these in any particular scenario. For instance, they also change based on the role you're playing. If the role I'm playing, and again, there was 5, it was executive, advisor, founder, board seat, and investor. If I was an investor, my form of compensation most likely wouldn't be brand or relationships, it would be cash and equity. I'm going to give you $25,000 of my money. How are you going to give me more back? If you were sitting in a job interview and you're saying, all right, you want to pay me $250, I get it. I wanted to make $300. I'm going to lose $50,000 in upside. How are you going to make up $50,000 of upside? More often than not, the CEO is going to look at him and say, well, you're coming here for the wrong reasons. I'm not interested. You're negotiating on money. We're trying to change the world. So money doesn't always factor into the most important thing. All of these things kind of play together. But that's how we're thinking about compensation. This is important. If you look back in 3 to 4 years and you think about some of the times you've hired the right people, recruited the right people, garnered the support of the right people, this is all you have to offer. What brand can I give you? What relationships can I give you? What cash can I give you, or equity? What can you learn by being part of my group? What legacy are we trying to lead to together, and how much fun or fulfillment will this be? And the reason fun and fulfillment are two different words at the end is fun could be hanging out at the jet ski docks on Lake Tahoe to some people, but fulfillment is a little bit different, which is why I've chosen both words, which is a challenging problem to solve. And you'll find that a fulfilling business that's trying to change something, a large enough market with a disruptive enough business model, is compensation sometimes enough? Any questions on compensation before I move past there? And we'll come back to it because it ends up being a really important fact. Yeah?
Yeah. So I'm just curious, when you're, say, like the companies in this room, mostly are very, very, very early stage startups where they don't have a lot of knowledge what their total end game would be, is it common to bring in advisors where they're uncompensated at first and then you work out compensation farther along?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as they're trying to build their advisory portfolio, they might have factored in the relationship with your company is the most important thing to them at this point, because you're a local company that they might join in the next 2 to 3 years, that they're just willing to trade simply for that, the association to you. And there's a difference between goodwill, which is somebody's doing something nice for you and making a couple of introductions, and an advisor. And we were going to get to this in a little bit, but it's good to put it out here now. Goodwill, you might have 100 people that gave you goodwill along the way as you helped or needed to build your company. You might have only papered 10 of them as an advisor. Advisor is somebody that you've moved into the second level of the arrangement. You've put an agreement in place. You've talked about the time commitment that they're going to have to the company. You've clearly identified compensation, and cash and equity might not be part of that at all. But it is that formalized agreement and the way that you're either going to use their name when they're not around, or that when they get a phone call, they're up to speed and up to date on your business, so they understand how they can be impactful when they get initiated.
And do you consider it a warning sign if you're a very early stage and you talk to people and they ask for some sort of compensation? You were talking about an employee coming in, for example, and saying, I'm trying to negotiate to go from 250,000 to 300,000 or something about numbers. Do you ever see it as a turnoff if you have somebody, or should an early stage company, when they go to speak to someone, be turned off if they ask for a certain percentage of equity, or say, I don't talk to people unless they give me 1%?
No, I mean, each birds of a feather, right, flock together. So you're going to find the people that you're drawn towards. They're trying to value their time. They're trying to value the bandwidth that they have in their portfolio. They're trying to value the amount of time that they put their brand out there in the hands of somebody else to use as their knowledge base. So it's 6 one way, half dozen another. There is a thought that goes around, which is everybody early on in your company should be an investor that's helping you out, and you shouldn't be handing out any equity to anybody that's not an investor. And then your investors should be your advisors, because you've ultimately drawn capital from that pool. But I don't think that's reasonable. With $2 billion of capital deployed into Southern California annually, with $10 billion of capital into Silicon Valley annually, you've got 2 markets that have 29 million people, San Diego to Santa Barbara, 22 million, 8 million, 7.2 actually in Silicon Valley. Just so many people, so many companies, so much capital that you kind of catch what you can, right? And the way that people make decisions are urgency and scarcity. So if you create that sense of urgency and that sense of scarcity that your deal's going away, and you can negotiate on a different principle with that advisor, you're trying to move them away from money. It might be Ted Mizell that sold Overture to Yahoo for $1.6 billion, who says, listen, I only advise companies at a 1% minimum equity position, and here's what I get. And he's been a professional advisor for many years, and he understands exactly how to trigger that ecosystem, versus somebody who's an executive at a startup. Let's just say they're the SVP of product, John Slade, that was at Rubicon. And he just left, and he's got a bunch of free time on his hand post-IPO. And he says, listen, I don't need anything from you. I'm just interested in building relationships with companies. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I actually haven't done a lot of aggressive advising because I've been so busy working. It was at Yahoo, and then he was at Rubicon, that I'm willing to just kind of trade you for goodwill now. Too much goodwill, and you don't lock that advisor into your business. You haven't benefited from the fact that you've brought them into the fold, you've brought them into your gravitational pull, and they're part of your company now. So let's quickly just define the executive versus the advisor, and then we'll get back to advisor. An executive is a person responsible for the administration of a project, activity, or business. In the real world, that means that they're in contact with the company 24/7, 365. They have a morning to evening presence. They get recurring pay, and everything is their problem. You know, if they don't show up for work, they get fired. If the business doesn't perform, they get fired. So that's what an executive is. Now, we're not asking an executive today who's servicing as an advisor to have that level of responsibility at your company. So what's an advisor? To give somebody a recommendation about what should be done. So in the real world, an advisor is an expert. It's a known person or brand. They have the ability to a la carte their experience. And I can always send out this deck too if you guys want these notes at the end too. They're generally available when they're called upon, and they're never full-time. So an advisor is not there to help you strategize about your business. They're not there to help you think through the grand scheme of your business model and your problems. They're not there to introduce you to every single person that they might have in their Rolodex or the ability to. They're on call, which is why you need a distributed advisory board. And some of the things that you guys are going to need as you start to scale your company is capital. So you might have an advisor specifically dedicated to helping you navigate the capital markets, both debt and equity. Equity germinates with a major part of our industry on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley. So somebody that might understand Silicon Valley, but there's also other venture markets, Seattle, Philly, where First Round Capital is based, New York, Dallas, Houston, Austin, Atlanta, and LA as well, obviously. So you might not be able to lead on such an important trigger in your company's success, raising capital, on a single advisor. And furthermore, you want to make sure that you do have an advisor when you start to enter that event. Another thing that you're going to need is talent. Another thing you're going to need is your idea, obviously. So each way that you kind of look at building your advisory board, these people are on call. They're not working at your company. And by the way, if they failed you in any of these responsibilities, hence the contract and the tenure associated with, and we'll get into that in a second, the advisory position that you've attached them to. You might attach them to a 6-month advisory deal, a 2-year advisory deal, an evergreen, advisory deal. You'd come back and you'd say, you know what? I've identified after 3 months that you weren't an expert in your space. I've identified that as a known person or brand, you have a bad brand. I've identified that you're not capable of a la carting your experience for us. You can only come in here and act like an executive. You can't act like an advisor. You're not available when we call you. It takes you 10 days to call us back, or you don't call us back, or you lose the emails. And the last one was just for you guys, that they never work full time. So this is the expectations that you're having upon that particular advisor when they're trying to impact your company. So why you need an advisor? Branded people. Actually, if you recognize any of these names or these people, go ahead and call them out, except for maybe Robert, because he'll probably recognize everybody. Does anybody know who that is? Yes. Come on. Robert, you can give that one up if you want. Oh, I'm picking on you. No, this one. This room should have that one.
You know what? I'm blanking. I know that face, but I'm blanking.
Disney's largest public Disney. LA's largest public company? Disney.
Yeah.
Mike Eisner.
That's Cameron.
Porzin Johnny.
If anyone gets that one. Matt Kaufman.
Sold the company for $330 million in 2004 to Experian, shortly followed by his company, sold for $465 million to Experian less than a year later. That year, Experian particularly wanted to spend $1 billion of capital on startups. His brother is the CEO of Zephyr, which used to be called Movie Clips. He's on the board of Demand Media, and he founded one of the leading marketing platforms acquired by Adobe called Omniture. Josh James. So let's look at those people differently. Applied Semantics, Caltech, Google, Factual, Hotlook, Nordstrom's. That was Adam Bernhard, the founder and CEO of Hotlook, that sold to Nordstrom's for close to $400 million when you factor in the earnout price in 2012. Elon Musk, PayPal, SolarCity, SpaceX, Tesla. It was Ted Mizell. Elevation Partners, Market Share, Overture, Yahoo, also McKinsey, but I forgot that logo. Mike Eisner, Disney, ABC, ESPN, Topps, The Guru. Cameron Porzanjani, DocSoc, Experian, LegalZoom, PriceGrabber. Matt Coffin, Lower My Bills, Experian, Rubicon, Goldstar, Machinima, Business.com. And then Josh James, Adobe, Demand Media, Omniture, Zephyr. So the quick ability to be able to trade on branded people and companies comes into effect as you start to look at how you need your advisory pool to react. And I call this the cocktail party conversation. If you have something special to say and you start to drink, usually people can't hold it back. It's where all the secrets get leaked, and it's where people get a little bit more embellished. So at a cocktail party, if I just hired a CFO to our company, let's call it, what do we do a great CFO? Nasty Gal. And Sophia Amoros, which we placed the CFO at Nasty Gal last year. Sophia Amoros is walking around a cocktail party. She's saying, I just got a CFO. It's amazing. Or she's saying, I got the CFO of Urban Outfitters, who was then the CFO of Ideally, who raised $100 million and got the company to exit, to move from New York to LA to become the CFO of our company. In either one of those cases, she still hasn't said the name of the person, hence the purpose of the picture early on. She traded on that person's brand and the company's in that conversation. So at a cocktail bar or a cocktail conversation, this is the information that you're using. And this is going to be important stuff as you start to scale your company. You need to have nuggets of credibility that you're going to pull out. At some point, you're not going to trade on your advisors anymore. At some point, your advisors are going to be an afterthought. You will have become a public company. Let's pick on TrueCar. Scott Painter, the founder of Cars Direct internet brand, who then went out and served as founding executive of multiple companies, including Zag.com, and then TrueCar, merged the companies together, went public, has $1 billion market cap, went public 90 days ago. The last advisor Scott may have used was a CFO, and I don't know if he did this, a CFO advisor, late stage Series C company, CFO that had been through multiple IPOs, to come in there and advise them as a company, how do we prepare ourselves for being public? What's it like the day after? How do we control information as it leaves the company? And what sort of hiring practices and capture of information and documentation? How do I, as the CEO, talk to analysts? This might be information that Scott's way past the point of offering equity in a company. So in terms of compensation, he might say, listen, I've got nothing to give you. I'll pay you for your advice. And maybe this is the CFO of Marketo that just went public. And he's like, listen, I'm willing to give you this advice, but I can't accept your money. I'm a CFO of a public company. I can't take cash from another company. I'm prohibited from consulting. Let's do a prize. I'll advise you for a trip to Sun Valley for my wife and I. So you see a lot of these advisory conferences get together at late stage Series C companies where you're trying to attract people that would never have been an advisor. And now he has an advisory weekend where he brings 5 executives into Sun Valley. It costs the company $100,000. They bring their families in. On Friday is advisory day. Company gets to pull some information out of that. They've set some sort of lightweight relationship now that they can follow up post that. And Scott Painter, prior to TrueCar's IPO, was able to get enough information. Now, I know we're on video, so that's a fabricated story. Using local companies as the trigger for the remembering the story, but that's how you would advise somebody later on in your business. But at that point, he's not going out to Wall Street saying, I just got advice from the CFO of Marketo that went public with a $1.8 billion market cap in 2011. He's just taking the advice. He doesn't need to trade anymore on people's brands or people's companies. So the second thing your guys are going to need is access. And again, reflect back on everything. When I say you guys are going to need, it's that you guys are going to need from an advisory board. Is you need access and you need relationships. So you need access to capital, you need access to talent, and you need access to customers. It is incredible how low founders index on these 3 things, when these are the most important things your company has. Because the challenge of starting a company is that you need to have a high risk tolerance. You need to be innovative on the emerging and bleeding edge of business. You need to have a low opportunity cost to starting a company. If I'm an executive at a business, let's call it I'm head of sales of Oracle, and I have access to all 1,000 Fortune 1,000 CIOs who have buying power of billions of dollars, I make $5 million a year as the head of sales of Oracle, or maybe the head of sales of West at Oracle making $2.5 million. So he has access to customers, or she has access to customers, but they're not founding a company. So their risk tolerance is so high. So when you're young and when that opportunity cost of creating a business kind of lines up with what you probably could have made or garnered in a 2014 income, you index low on these things. You need to find a way to counterbalance your youth with advisors that bring you these three things. Actually, let's go back there for a second. On capital, just to make that clear, advisors aren't there to produce relationships with VCs that they're guaranteed will meet you. What an advisor can do is help you think about capital, can help you think about Series A, seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, can help you think about valuation structures, can help you think about venture debt, can help you think about how you transfer working capital in, can help you think about the nomenclature and the discussion points that are triggers for VCs today. You know, when we were in the other room talking earlier, we said one of the triggers today is the word marketplace. You know, e-commerce companies, let's choose LegalZoom. LegalZoom just raised $200 million, selling 50% of the company, which gives them an estimated value of $400 million. And let's just say that was light, but they're a $500 million company with top line revenue in a couple $100 million range today. You know, some of that is readily public because they filed for an IPO a couple of years ago. Airbnb, which has tremendously less revenue than that, just raised money at a $10 billion market cap. HomeAway, which went public with a $40 million revenue base, which today is probably at about a $300 million run rate, has a $4 billion market cap. Airbnb and HomeAway are marketplaces. A marketplace has a buyer and a seller. You bring the buyer in, and you bring the seller in, and you incite activity. And the economics, the lifetime value, the revenue per user, the ARPU, annual revenue per user, the subscriber acquisition costs, inherently either are going up or going down. If they're SACs, going down. If it's ARPU, it goes up over time because you incite activity in the marketplace. LegalZoom is an e-commerce company. They drive traffic via direct response TV and radio and internet advertising. They have a cost to that traffic, and they get you to buy something out of a shopping cart before you push yourself out. So the economics of valuation at an e-commerce company versus a marketplace are dramatically different. So an advisor that's coming to you and supporting you with capital ideas or supporting you around knowledge around capital is helping you think about how to define yourself as a marketplace in today's model, how the VCs will then respond to that. Now, marketplaces are incredibly difficult to build, where you need buyers and sellers to come in at the same time. It's much less based on, do you have the best product? And it's more based around, do you have the most innovative ideas and teams and virality? And one of our local companies that has done a really good job in the marketplace category is Dog Vacay. They're a marketplace of buyers, which is dog owners, and sellers. People that will wash your dog, walk your dog, train your dog, board your dog, come sit with your dog during the day. And with 78 million dogs in the US, more dogs than kids in the US, in a $60 billion pet category, of which $11 billion is pet services and $14 billion is veterinary services, a capital advisor could help Dog Vacay, if this was one of their challenges, which it wasn't early on, think about how they define themselves to be attractive to investors so they can ultimately get them the kind of return that would warrant an early stage investment. Any questions on capital before I move to talent? So talent, obviously you're talking to somebody here, or I'm talking to you about the importance of talent, but how do you set up your org charts? What are the different functional areas? Should I hire a manager, a director, a VP, or a chief financial, chief marketing? What are the pros and cons to each? What companies would I be looking for talent from? And customers are more defined. But at the end of the day, the knowledge base that we're talking about here, it has to come from an advisor that can also give you access. So if otherwise it's just go read a post online from one of the active bloggers, Mark Suster, Fred Wilson, Brad Feld, Bill Gurley, if you just want to get the information. So you want the information and the access with the person that has the relationship to be the one that gives you the advice. So if you're getting advice about talent from a CEO who built a company in New York, or you're getting advice from a CEO who built a company in Los Angeles, and your company is in Los Angeles, the better advisor would be the CEO that built a company here. The even better advisor is the CEO that built, scaled, and sold a company here. So when they start to introduce you to some of these relationships, they're people that are ready to move, or they potentially can influence to move. Customers is pretty self-evident or explanatory. So we're still on why you need an advisor. Some of that stuff I kind of just talked on, the guidance, the answers, the opinions. How do I set up my organization? How do we grow our organization or maintain our organization's growth? How do we fit into our industry? How do we lead the industry? How do we follow the industry? How do we prepare for some sort of event, whether it's a merger, whether we're on the buy side and it's an acquisition, whether it's liquidity, whether that is both in terms of fundraising early on where investors are buying equity, or it's founder liquidity, Series B, Series C, because you've made peanuts for the last couple of years and an investor's willing to come in and buy some of your shares. How do you prepare for the exit? What does that look like? So these guidance and these answers and these opinions, if they're coming when you have the question to a foreign group of people that have no association to your company and no political or social capital developed with you, the answers are just different. If they're coming from a single source, the answers are risky. So again, you want to distribute your advisory board. You want to think about some of these answers and opinions that you're looking for over time. You want to make sure that that you have different advisors over different cycles in your company. I mean, what you don't need to probably worry about today is M&A, liquidity, and exit. You don't know whether that's going to be an IPO, a sell-side international growth, a JV, a sale to a private equity firm, a merger between two companies. So Upfront Ventures just put together Little Black Bag and Pose, both Upfront Venture portfolio companies. Bursley, another Mark Schuster company, acquired. They acquired a company about a year ago, TestFlight, which became more valuable than the company that they were, which is why Apple spent $30 million to buy Bursley. They wanted TestFlight. So as it starts to relate around this, these are things that aren't as important later on, but and things will constantly reorganize on the importance. So again, now we're going to switch from why you need advisors to who can be an advisor. Was there any questions before you kind of move past this? Why you need advisors? Yeah.
Is it typical to have a certain time frame, like 6 months or a year or 2 years, that you bring on advisors?
2 years. 2 years is the standard. It's what your agreement usually lines them up to. But a lot of these advisors they're carrying the relationship on with you, but that commitment for those 2 years is the responsibility you have to the advisor as well, which is keeping them up to date, monthly or quarterly, in some sort of fashion that when you do call them, the responsibility they would have to get back to you in a timely manner, the balance of their own portfolio to make sure that they're not working with competitive companies in that particular time. And if they're at a company that ultimately monitors and tracks an Adobe, an SAP, a News Corp, a Google, an Amazon, a Microsoft, that looks at what their advisory portfolio would be, they're going to constantly have to look at that portfolio and compare it to corporate initiatives to make sure that the company that they're at isn't starting to work on an initiative that you might feel was taken from you in some sort of conversation and executed at their corporate level. So they've got to watch that period of time. So 2-year agreement. Sometimes they're going to want less. Sometimes they're going to want just to be evergreen. I always suggest to the executive that they term it out so they can take on more. If you feel like you have 30 active advisory deals at any given time that could call you versus over a 10-year cycle, being able to know that you have 1 to 2 a year that are coming into your portfolio that are also churning out of your portfolio. And it doesn't mean that you don't help a company past that 2 years. You own some equity in the company and you want to be responsible and you obviously hope for the best. Yeah.
So if they do 2 years and you do it for equity, do you vest out the shares or do you just give it to them,
Vest out the shares.
always?
Yeah.
Evenly?
It depends. It depends. I mean, you can do it on a quarterly grant. You can do it on a monthly grant. You can do it on a fully accelerated change of control, which is, hey, if we get bought tomorrow, I'll give you everything. Advisors and board seats usually have fully accelerated shares because their advice isn't changing. Executives have some sort of acceleration clause that says at an M&A event you'll forward vest this much. Advisors usually get it all. But yeah.
Anything up front, like a bonus, or that's not common?
No, I mean you don't want to use cash is not what your advisors are looking for. If they're looking for cash, they're consultants.
Bonus of equity, like 50,000 up front as far as shares, and 100,000 investing over 2 years.
No, really, I don't see that. I mean, so if they're not living up to the expectation as an advisor, and so you've written into your contract certain things, and it isn't to police an executive who might say, well, you're a early stage company with 2 people in a room with $200,000, and you're trying to tell me how you want me to respond and how you want me to act. I think what you're trying to say is I'm trying to set up a parameter for an advisory board so I can have expectations on how to use that board. And I won't use more than 10 hours a year of your time. 10 hours a year is a fantastic amount of time, right? That's 10 one-hour meetings. That means you're meeting them once a month at their office for an hour. It could be, a meeting a quarter for, an hour and a half that then results in having 4 extra hours of bandwidth times. That's, 200 emails that you can do in 4 hours that they're doing on behalf of your company on an annualized basis. And a lot of times you're just trading on the reputation, right? You're saying, Mike Eisner's on my advisory board. That was enough. I gave him 1 point just for that. Now what that really meant was Mike Eisner had been briefed on your business, had said, I'm willing to let you trade on my name. I like your company enough to go through this. So the credibility that was associated to that also opened up potentially 10 or 15 doors on Sand Hill Road. So without him actually having to be there and do anything, he was able to impact it. So it might not always be hours that you're giving me. It might be other factors. But again, if 60 days in he goes, you know what, I don't want you guys using my name anymore, you have to then address why. Did we overuse it? Did we say something wrong? Did we not live up to the expectations? And you either remedy that. If he says, you can't use my name anymore, that's not what I want to do, well, you're saying, listen, the advisory agreement is null and void. That's my boy right there. So Daniel Tudo used to work at Safire Partners for 5 years. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Any other before we move on? Yeah. Oh, is that? No, okay, sorry. So we just talked about why you need advisors. Now we're talking about who can be an advisor. A founder of a company, a CEO, head of finance, sales, marketing, biz dev, product, tech, data, general managers, operations, HR, legal, investors, recruiters, government officials, retired executives, educators. So there's really no set rule on who could be an advisor. What you need to make sure is that you build a balanced board. Sometimes the retired executives are fantastic. They've got more time to offer. They're still not looking for cash. They're not looking, as we talked earlier, about the word consulting being a portfolio factor that isn't relevant for how they're thinking about their career. They're just thinking about how they can give you more time, and it factors into equity. But each one of these, and it doesn't always have to be the head of. It doesn't always have to be the head of finance, the CFO of the company. Sometimes it could be the vice president of planning and analysis. That particular person at, let's call it Adobe, is thinking about the divisional P&Ls that they have across their marketing cloud, across their creative suite and solutions, macro, media, and Final Cut Pro, and Dreamweaver. So they're thinking about how a company strategically thinks about itself. They're thinking about how the company goes through their annual cycle of putting a strategy in place, how they do goal setting against that, how they then forecast and budget effectively against multiple P&Ls. So that might be a better executive to advise your company than the CFO of Adobe. On the other side of that equation, there's a controller in that same group. So the controller who thinks about how do we go through audit, how do we get data captured in our company, what system are we using, what auditor, Big Four or Big Eight should we be using? The Big Four being KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. The next level down being the BDO Seidmans, the Grant Thorntons. Now, if you're getting advice from somebody who's gone through the ecosystem of getting a company off the ground, and they're saying Pricewaterhouse is $125,000 a year for an audit. You don't need that level of audit. You need a $40,000 audit. That's done by BDO Seidman. When you get to a Series A Tier 1 venture fund, Benchmark, Sequoia, Kleiner, Redpoint on Sand Hill Road, they're going to want you to be audited by a Big Four. Now, if your advice wasn't coming clearly through and you got the Big Four today and you spent the extra money, then you didn't realize how difficult it was to switch out your auditing firms, and now you found out that to switch out your auditing firms took a massive amount of money, time, and influence. You might decide to go with a Big Four auditor on day one, knowing that you're going to raise money from a venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road earlier. You might decide to take that risk later on. But that's advice a controller would give you that potentially the vice president of financial planning and analysis wouldn't have. Again, you're still not using the CFO of Adobe as your advisor in this particular equation for finance. There's a tremendous amount of ways you can slice and dice that and look at it like this bowl of porridge is too hot, this one is too cold, and this one's just right. But, and the enemy of great is perfect. But you want to be able to think through how each one of these functions can advise your company. You'll never have this many advisors, with delineation across different functions like controller and FP&A and CFO inside of your company. But again, these are ways to think about it. So is there any other questions on who can be an advisor before we just move on quickly? Okay. So how do you compensate these guys and gals? So you have to think about going back earlier to the fact that we had 6 triggers of compensation. What is important to them? Is relationships important? Is their legacy important? Is their ability to learn from your company important? Is money important? And money comes in cash, which is immediate, or equity, which is long-term upside. Is brand important for them? Or is fulfillment at this stage? And you don't need to be independent of merging these things together. Very few times you have every single one of those things line up in a single deal. So, and this is my opinion, I think an advisor should first be looking to get, so an advisor gives you access and information. They give you visibility and trends. This is the opportunity to get to their, this is how I was thinking about it. So here's what an advisor is thinking when they come to you. I want access to the local startup community, and I want information from that community. I want visibility, and I want trend analysis. I want to see that I'm possibly working, or know that I'm possibly working with a company that I could have my next executive role at. I want to continue to build my personal brand. And so in that particular equation for what an advisor is looking for, the rank that we had from that past page is relationships is the most important. Then their ability to learn. Then their ability to add to their brand. Then to be in a fulfilling place. Money is actually, in this particular way of thinking about the world, is the 5th thing on their list. And then legacy is at the bottom. And it's not that legacy is not important, but bringing, fresh water to Africa, or supporting a, developing ecosystem in, Nigeria. I think I heard one company here today that's doing that. So, what was the name of your company? Enru. So you would probably be trading on legacy a lot, but you don't want a bunch of advisors that are there just for legacy. I mean, you want some advisors that want to make some darn money too. You're like, we're capitalists. The investors are capitalists. The investors are working with limited partners that have given them money that need a great return on their investment of capital. So at the end of the day, you don't want a bunch of people that are philanthropists that are helping your business, but that might be how you ultimately attract them early on with legacy. But when you're pitching your advisors, you're starting with the most value of currency that you have, which is we're a growing company. You want to associate to this community of growing companies. We could potentially be a company that you join later on. You should help us because you want to have a relationship with us. We're an emerging company. We're in a large market with a disruptive business model, which is the 2 factors that any venture capitalist wants to see. If your market's not large enough and your model's not disruptive enough, you don't get funded. Nobody's looking for an e-commerce site to bring Turkish bath towels to the US. It's not a big enough market. We want a massive market, so a $150 billion fashion category, and a disruptive business model within that. You're then selling the brand, my company, and with brand you might be actually marketing to that particular advisor the other members of your advisory board, which also actually factors into relationships as well, if you're introducing your advisory board to each other. But you're saying to them in terms of brand, I'm on your LinkedIn right now, John Smith, your LinkedIn right now says, 5 years at, Edmunds.com and 5 years at TrueCar.com. You're a director of product at Edmunds.com, you're a VP of product at TrueCar.com. Your brand looks weak. I was listening to a recruiter the other day who says, you got to have advisory deals on your LinkedIn. We could be that for you. The association with our company is going to help your brand. And when you're comfortable with us and when we're comfortable with you and we formalize this agreement and you go to your LinkedIn profile and you put in advisor to our company, your brand just got better. Our brand ideally got better too. This is going to be fulfilling work. The time that we're going to spend together, the interest in the category, the problem that we're trying to solve is all going to be fun. And if it's not fun for them to solve problems and build businesses and it's a chore, then they're probably not doing any of this stuff. Rest is self-explanatory. So here's where the rubber meets the road. So outside of just selling them on the fact that you've got all of this esoteric information and involvement and association you can give them, you're a seed stage Series A business. You give no cash. Your equity position for an advisor is somewhere usually between 1/4 to 1%. I think the total pool of advisory equity that you're going to deploy on average over the life cycle of a company, if you're a traditional venture-backed business, which is friends and family, probably avoid the accelerator, go right to Series A for 1 to 3 or 3 to 5 million, 1 to 3 down here, 3 to 5 up north. Series B of 5 to 15 million, and then a growth stage round of 20 to 25 million before exit. You will have spent, in that particular scenario, which is the very standard venture growth model, 2% of your company on advisors. For that 2% of your company that you spent, you will have probably attracted somewhere between 10 to 20 advisors. So that means you're offering them somewhere between 1/10 to 2/10 of a position in your company. So you can't keep this equity position consistent all the way through Series B, Series C, and established. So it's more aggressive early on, and then it starts to tear off. Later on, you're actually starting to be able to put a value associated to the equity. And then to the question on term earlier, 2 years of vesting. And it's full acceleration on change of control. So if you get bought, they're getting all of the equity that you've offered them. But if they're not living up to the expectation, you want to make sure that you have a process of continual review, not just frustration after 6 months and a blow up with an advisor, or a lack of contact anymore with an advisor to hope they forget about the equity that you offered them. You want to every quarter review their impact on the company, review how many times you called them, review the speed of which, whatever KPIs you want to measure. Speed of responsiveness, information delivered, access to the relationship base, ability to trade in their name, whatever those KPIs are, those key performance indicators. And that's something outside of, I said this earlier, which is your number one job now as the CEO of a company or a founder of a company is to be the head recruiter. You're always recruiting talent. You're always recruiting investors. You're already recruiting advisors. To recruit effectively means you have to actually measure performance when they come into the company. So as casual or as collegial as your company feels early on, or familiar as your company feels early on, you have to sit down once a month, once a quarter, once a year, whatever those are going to be, and do your performance reviews, even against your own founder, even against yourself, and especially with your advisors. And when they violate the terms of their performance, at least the expectations that you have the choice to redefine the expectations, redefine the compensation, or end the relationship. More often than not, you're usually giving them another quarter, saying, hey, listen, I called you 3 times last quarter, you didn't call us back. If that happens again the next quarter, let's kind of kill our advisory agreement. And you usually have a pretty open advisor at that point, either fixing their behavior or willing to end the established relationship. So moving along the company cycle, Series B, you still see cash at 0. The equity position has gone down to 1/10 to 2/10 of a point for an advisor. So in some of these examples that I've given you, if you get Mike Eisner to be on your advisory board, he's going to want the higher end of this stuff early on. He's probably also going to want to be an investor in your company early on. And then once they're an investor, you're trading on them as an advisor without having to pay them advisor equity. But let's just say it's somebody else. So it's not Mike Eisner. It's the general manager of family at Disney, who then left to go to the LA Times as the GM of digital at the LA Times, Emily Smith. Now, Emily's not Mike Eisner, and when she comes in, she's going to want less. She wants to define her career differently. She wants to help build her brand outside of the company. She wants to think about how she builds a relationship base with companies she might join next. So Mike Eisner might be taking from that Disney experience 1%. Emily might be actually at 0.1% early on. So you have to think about who you're offering the equity to. Not every advisor gets this slug. And then Series C, I usually don't see the number breaking 1/10 of a point in equity, but it depends what you're asking for. It depends who your advisor is. Again, your angels early on are also some of your advisors. Your Series A and Series B VCs are your advisors in this area. Series C, your advisory portfolio also might just be a basis of the sister effect, the Keiretsu effect that you have inside of your venture portfolio. So Dog Vacay, an example I gave earlier, Bill Gurley from Benchmark funded Dog Vacay. Bill Gurley is also the lead investor in Zillow, OpenTable, Yelp, Uber, and oh geez, there's more in there, but yeah.
By Series C, how many advisors do you have now?
20. Life cycled out probably the first half, 10 active-ish. But it could also come, when I was going to finish there, it could come from the other portfolios. So Bill Gurley can help Aaron Hirschhorn at Dog Vacay get advice from his other portfolio companies. Go talk to Rich Barton at Zillow. Go talk to Travis at Uber. Oh, Yelp was the other one he's got. Go talk to the GM of digital at Yelp. And when he calls up, because he was influential inside of the growth of that company, even though most of those companies, Yelp, Zillow, OpenTable, and Grubhub, sorry, that was the last one, have now all exited. The CEOs are usually pretty open to talk to their lead investor at any given time and actually help that lead investor's other portfolio company grow. So you're getting advisors in that particular case for free. So it's not always coming down to equity. Now, I should say you're getting advisors free. You're getting advice for free in that scenario. Again, advisor is still a paper deal. But if the CEO of Zillow, Rich Barton, who had seen an exit, who's now potentially willing to come in and say to Aaron, I'll come in and advise you on how to scale your business and let's do a little equity transfer. I don't think, if Aaron was a Series C company with Dog Vacay running at a $200 million run rate, planning for an IPO or an exit in 12 to 18 months, Rich Barton would say, listen, a tenth of a point sounds good. You're a $1 billion market cap, every tenth of a point is $1 million. Like, it's not chump change at that point. And if you're an Uber, a tenth of a point is $18 million. If you're Airbnb, a tenth of a point is $10 million. And then we talked a little bit about this. If you're an established company, it's usually delivered in the form of rewards and trips. You could organize your advisors in a destination event: Hawaii, San Diego, New York, Sun Valley, Aspen. You pay for everything. They get to have some fun. There's zero equity here. And you usually term that out over 1 to 2 years. You're saying, listen, we're going to get together, and do this again next year. And it's more of an agreement that they'll come to the next advisory meeting. You might have 3 advisory meetings over 3 years or 2 years. So in terms of getting an advisor, you got to get them to sign an agreement, which looks, actually I'll show you some agreements in a little bit. I'll send you guys advisory agreements too. What's your term? What's your equity? Can I use your name? How much time will you give us? Defining the role, set meetings, and create a clear plan to keep the advisor up to date. So number one here, signing an agreement and creating a plan to keep the advisor up to date are both tools that I will show you. And these are very important. Especially the last one, if you're not sending out information to your advisory pool, here's how our pitch has changed, here's how our talent base has changed, here's how our corporate objectives have changed, here's how our cash on hand has changed. Whatever you choose to give them as a set of information, the commitment is that you're giving them that set of information in some sort of regular format, monthly or quarterly. The commitment they're making to you is to read it. So when you do call them, you might only call this particular advisor twice a year. Or if you look back, hindsight 2020, in the past 12 months, you've only called them 2 times. But both times that you called them, they had an up-to-date perspective on your company. You didn't need to use the first 30 minutes to tell them what was going on with your business. So you keep them up to date on email, on phone, in person. Let me switch to that real quickly. This is what an advisory update email looks like. Actually, yeah, this one. So the top end of it is company information. Should be able to get a little clearer than that. You see that? It's pretty ugly. Okay, company information. This is the most current company contact description, highlights, and elevator pitch. We will continue to evolve this, and we want the Board of Advisors, B of A, to have the most current to use when making introductions. So you're constantly changing the messaging of your company early on. So as your description changes, you're going on. Potentially every time your description changes for how you talk about your business, you might send your advisors a new update. You might keep this in Dropbox in a shared folder that allows your advisor to have access to that. You might put it behind a register wall that you know when the advisor logs in and when they don't, so you have some sort of audit fashion to be able to go back and say, well, you've never even logged into the file or the folder. But you're constantly changing the description. Worst thing is that an advisor is at an event where they can talk about your business and they describe it wrong. And then somebody else is there going, no, 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 that's not what they do. And you're like, oh, I haven't talked to the company in 6 months. You know, it's embarrassing. So this is your responsibility to keep the description, the highlights, and the elevator pitch crisp and up to date. This word says people. So this is giving them some sort of, ooh, I'll do it from over here. So you're constantly adding in who your current management is, CEO, CTO, VP of product, VP of sales. You're putting their name in there. You're linking to their LinkedIn profile and you're putting their email address. So if the advisor needs to get a hold of anybody at the company and they figure, hey, I've got this great customer on the hook. I don't always need to go through the CEO. I know how to get the head of sales to pick up the phone, or I know how to get a hold of them. You might actually then list out their current consultants, the other current advisors. The one advisor form of compensation might be, wow, this is a fantastic advisory board. I want to be on it. Now, for that to work, you need to make sure that the advisors get to trade on each other's names. Like I might say, hey, I'm on an advisory board with Mike Eisner. Might not have ever met him, but now I just got to use my name and Mike Eisner's name in the same sentence. Now, you would have maybe put together an advisory board that had meetings. And if your advisory board had meetings and you got to bring world-class advisors to these meetings and other world-class advisors got to get together and they use the cover of your company to have a conversation off the books at the Beverly Hills Hotel once a month to talk about your digital media startup and how the ecosystem was changing. So again, that comes back into another form of compensation where you're saying to somebody, I want you to serve on our advisory board because all the advisors on our board know each other and we introduce them to each other. So current consultants, current advisors, and then also what you're looking to hire. Weird. All right, this did 2 pages at the same time. This is the timeline of the company's expansion. So Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q1, Q2. The financial report, if you choose to put information about your company's finances in here. Some of this stuff doesn't need to go in. Some things you can have for different advisors and actually create an email for that particular advisor. Any major efforts with customers, any new moves you're making, the financing updates in the company, any relationships, both in terms of established relationships as well as relationships you're looking for. Any updates or asks. So this is where your executive team, this says updates and asks from the executive team. So the name and the title. So John Smith, VP of Product, the update from the product organization as well as asking for. So now this document's kept in a format where other executives have a responsibility to log into this advisory document sometime over the cycle of whatever your deliverable is going to be, monthly or quarterly. I usually don't recommend more than quarterly, or more distance between them than quarterly. And you can do them as often as you want, but you're asking that executive team to come in there and be responsible to make sure that their section's filled out. And then lastly is Board of Advisor requests. This is where you can talk to a specific advisor and make requests. This tool is how you keep up to date. And although it feels very 1.0, because it's a document, it's very easy to read. So when they're on a plane or on their mobile phone, and they can quickly pull up your documents, they can go into a Dropbox folder that you shared or a box folder that you shared, they can quickly get new information, they can quickly find out what the requests are, and they commit to going into that document at least once a month. And then the last document, before we get back to just kind of closing out the discussion, this is an advisor agreement. And I'll send you both the update format as well as the advisor agreement. It's all pretty standard stuff. The important part is at the end, where you have the Exhibit A, the appendix, where you're actually going to define it. Provide guidance and perspective around developments and trends in this space, such as. So this is important. This changes per each advisor that you have. And this is where you set the expectations. And this is where you can put in how much time that they expect them to give. And by the way, an advisor can always give more time, but you're committed to not taking any more than you've put. And then here's where you put the equity. Subject to approval by the company, the advisor will be granted. So that's what the advisor agreement looks like. So you got to keep them up to date. And just to kind of summarize the helpful tips that we talked about, you hire different types of advisors. Don't always hire advisors that agree with your company's vision. Hire advisors that have time to offer. Make it clear what information or action you expect from your advisors. Create a budget, equity, and cost for meetings to support the advisory board. Keep advisors up to date so they can be effective on call when you reach out. This should be consistent, the format we just talked about, or whatever format you want to use, but it's consistent and it's scheduled. And have advisory meetings. I talked about here creating a budget for the cost of these meetings. Advisory boards are first and foremost underused, but when they are used, they feel very virtual. You might have secured an advisor and not seen them again in person for a year or two. I know everybody gets busy, but meetings allow you to, whether or not they come to them. And then introduce the advisors to each other. The more accountability there is on your advisory board, the more connectivity there is, the better advisors you get. And then we talked about how I recruit earlier, but you do it the same way. What you want to do is figure out the companies you want to see advisors from, the titles those advisors have held, the years they held that title at that company. Am I giving you a... Daniel and I have said this probably a million times. The location of which you want these advisors to be based. Run the search. Go to LinkedIn. Go to corporate websites. Run Google searches. Look at press releases. You'll find 300 to 500 advisory candidates potential. Rank and review them. Go through each one. This should be in Excel. Column A is the advisor's name. Column B is their LinkedIn profile. Column C is the current company they work at. Column D is the title that they currently have. Column E is the target company. You said, I found you because you were an advisor at this company. Column F, yes or no. Do you like them or not, right? And maybe some notes in column, FG. So when you're ranking them, you want to review them and get to the top 10 to 25. And the trick with advisory outreach is that you don't want to reach out to all 25 advisors at the same time, have all 25 of them say yes, and then have to turn down 24 of your 25 outreaches. Like, I already got my advisor. So you have to be sensitive on how you reach out to the population, because these are influential people that you want to ultimately have a very good rapport with. So you need to rank and review them, get to the top end of the list, and then prioritize it. And call the one you want the most first. Use LinkedIn, send them an email through LinkedIn, give them a day or two to respond. If they don't respond, go to the next one. So when you contact them, are you interested? Can I afford you? Do you have reasonable expectations? Are you available to do advisory deals? Are you local? I don't want an advisor in New York, I want an advisor in LA, because you also want to know that you're building an advisory board of people that are likely, or executives that are likely to be able to work at your company later on as you start to scale. And you're going to that tool to be able to have relationships with, so it doesn't feel so foreign and new when you need to hire somebody at a significant level in your company. Are they qualified? Create the expectations and thoughts of what you're looking for from the advisor, and make sure they can do that. Yeah, I know a lot about venture financing, but I don't have any contacts in Sand Hill Road. Well, let me get back to you. We're trying to build this advisory board. I'm only going to put 10 to 20 people on it over the cycle of my entire company's life cycle. I'm really trying to identify an advisor that not only has the access to the information I'm looking for and perspective, but also has current contacts. And it sounds like when you guys completely skipped over Silicon Valley. You raised from a Seattle fund and a Philly fund and then an LA fund. You have a couple of relationships. You got your fundraising done really quickly, so you didn't take 40 meetings. You were able to raise money in a very quick format. So your relationships are super light in the venture world, and I'm kind of looking for the trifecta: knowledge, a brand, and relationships. By the time you go through that, if you on average got through, maybe you got it knocked out on the first call, who knows. On average, you're going to go through 10 to 25 calls, and you're going to get to 3 to 7 candidates. You're going to make a decision. So we'll move off of advisor in a second, and I'll give you a little LA knowledge. But this is time for Q&A, and see how much of this resonated. Any questions?
Speaking
Yeah.
about Los Angeles, and you're saying to pursue locally based executives. Los Angeles is becoming thinner and thinner in terms of high-powered corporate offices. We're losing a lot to other geographic areas. Are you seeing a drop-off in available interest and talent from the Los Angeles market?
I'm not. It's hard because the grass always looks greener on the other side, especially when you're here. LA is the #2 venture and emerging growth ecosystem on the planet. It's only followed behind Silicon Valley, and they're #1 because in the last, let's call it 20 years, they've had 40 companies that have reached a $10 billion market cap and greater. So those companies stay there with corporate headquarters: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Yahoo, eBay, Salesforce, Oracle, Cisco, Intel, VMware, etc.
Do that for LA. Can you run that list for
Yeah,
LA?
well, you can. You can go back to all the way back to 1996 when you go back to 1990 when Peter Norton started Symantec here, or started Norton that Symantec acquired. You've got GeoCities and CitySearch and Ticketmaster and Overture and Applied Semantics, and you've got Lower My Bills, PriceGrabber, Shopzilla, Rent.com. You've got captains of industry inside of this ecosystem, obviously overshadowed by Hollywood. You've got now some things that we've done over the last few years that have started to produce multi-billion-dollar exits, like Beats Music and Oculus and hopefully Snapchat and Sonos. So you've got roughly 3,000 to 4,000 emerging companies that have come out of this ecosystem in the last 20 years with about 400 exits, 450 to 500 at the max. Not all of these are great wins. Some of them are singles and doubles. So it's hard when you want to only point to the home runs, which you can see in Silicon Valley, which is an hour flight away. But Silicon Valley being a phenomenon that happened in our lifetime, an hour away, it's hard to enter into that ecosystem without a base of relationships. It's a highly competitive talent market. And when you enter into that talent market, you're competing against the Yahoos and the eBays and the Facebooks and the Twitters as well, which have very little to no attrition at certain points in their life cycle. So LA is the #2 venture market. People give New York a lot of credit for kind of being in there, but what New York doesn't have is the scale of exits that we have. So we have a factor of many times over the number of exits that New York has. So we can try to do that same thing I just did when I rattled off a bunch of exits in LA, and there's many, many more. People start looking in New York like, Tumblr, Buddy Media, DoubleClick, and you're kind of out. HuffPo. So it just doesn't have that same scale. But New York, San Francisco, and LA are the infinite markets where there is a tremendous amount of supply. LA County with 10 million people and 88 cities inside of LA County that make up our ecosystems. We have 88 different mayors. So how does Santa Monica feel when they're being called LA, right? So they've kind of tried to redefine themselves, calling themselves Silicon Beach, which is a stupid name because you live in LA. If you go around the world and you want to try to ingratiate yourself to anybody and you say you're from Silicon Beach, they go, what? You say they're from LA, I don't care what country you're from, you see the person's heart brighten up. LAs are where people have been coming here since the early 1900s to make their dreams come true, right? We have 118 colleges and universities in LA County alone. That makes us the most education-dense, rich ecosystem on the planet. So you have $3.5 billion of capital deployed in the LA ecosystem, and this is a stat that's almost a year old, so I'm sure it's a lot bigger now, since 2009. So you have hundreds, thousands of active deals at every given stage. The challenge that we have in this marketplace is that we go out, not up. So there is no density like New York feels. And New York's fantastic to live between the ages of 21 to 31 when you graduate college, and then you don't live in New York anymore, you live in New Jersey because you have kids. And especially if you're doing a startup and you have a kid and you're trying to live in, and you're living on a train. So LA it's comfortable because it's big. That's also our challenge. Our challenge is our sprawl. Our challenge is not the results of what's happening in this marketplace. Our challenge is that there isn't a concise and cohesive story that people are using, which is something we've been trying to change over the last few years. And I think it's okay and proud to be #2. I think there's lots of people that look at LA and this ecosystem, including our mayor, Eric Garcetti, that says LA is #1. LA is the best place to start a company, and especially inside of our ecosystems when you talk about digital media and some of the online video sites and you talk about e-commerce solutions. 42% of the goods that come into this country come into the LA port. If you have any sort of goods import business, you want to get your product faster, they're coming directly in through this product or through this pipeline. So I know it's a tremendous amount of stats that you look at, but this is the market you're in. You're in an infinite market with with the challenges of how do I find the center? In Chicago, in Austin, in Houston, in Dallas, in Boulder, in Denver, in Seattle. You show up at the networking meeting at the center of the town. You go to, there's always more than one networking meeting a day because there's different types of people at all different levels and different industries, but you go to the one that you're a fit with, and a year later you know everybody in the town. There is no solution like that here. If there was one meeting in the center of town that everybody went to, you'd have 25,000 people at it. So with 10 million people, with a massive market, with a tremendous amount of education institutions. Now, I didn't answer your point, which is the flight of corporate America and where are our enterprise? Our enterprise is Disney, Amgen, Mattel, Avery Dennison, Nestle, which don't match up to what the ecosystem of startups would need. HP, Intel, Cisco, Yahoo, half the companies I rattled off before. And there's no way to solve that. But there is no historical empirical evidence that say if you have an executive from Facebook on your advisory board, you're going to succeed. And you can still go up to Silicon Valley and get an executive from Facebook on your advisory board. You just can't expect them to work at your company and move to LA. And LA is also not set up in the same way that people relocate from Silicon Valley. I mean, Silicon Valley has hundreds of enclaves that are comfortable to live in, like Los Altos and Willow Glen in San Jose. They're neighborhoods. They feel like Calabasas, and they feel like Palos Verdes, and they feel like La Cañada. I just named all 3 LA has. So you can't take an executive from Silicon Valley that worked at Twitter that has 3 kids and put them in Beverly Hills. They're like, what the heck just happened to me? I lived in Los Altos, and I had a neighborhood, and we had a feel. So there is just political and social climates that just don't work. But you have to do what you got. And what you've got is an infinite market with a tremendous amount of resources that if you can find a way to navigate through it, it's a lot better than being in Cleveland. Some of this data comes from a group that I helped create called the LA Mayor's Council with a gentleman by the name of Zach Zalon. And we did this for the former mayor, and we've continued on and worked with Garcetti on this. But that's only one of our 88 mayors. And LA City has things that are important to LA City that don't always line up with Santa Monica or Beverly Hills or Glendale or Burbank or West Hollywood or Culver City or Venice that all have different mayors. Actually, Venice is part of LA. But so that group has been evolved into a group called In LA, which stands for Innovate LA, in partnership with the LA EDC, the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation, Los Angeles County. So we've evolved that group to think more about the county as opposed to the city of Los Angeles. And ideally, and some of the things that came out of that were the Blackstone Launchpad. When they came here and they looked at markets that they wanted to do that in, we were hopefully a supporting mechanism to decide that they wanted to invest in Southern California. But so the stats are something that are going to become more and more ready to use and more available, and you're going to need them when you raise money. You're going to need them to get in front of a VC in any other market and say, why would I want to invest in a company in LA? And we can always get into a debate over a couple glasses of wine on how we make our next juggernaut, a $10 billion market cap, but that's hard to do anytime. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm back to advisors a little bit. So you're pitched at the very end about kind of doing almost like the executive search approach. I realize if you're on a retained search, somebody's, you're looking for another executive for Disney or whoever, or maybe more early stage companies. It's not easier, it makes sense to go through. But what I'm kind of curious about is for the very early stage, seed stage companies like the ones that are in this room, I've always thought that the approach to getting advisors is much more getting connected to angel investors and going to say like TCA meetings and kind of doing it that way versus doing like a cold call to somebody at one of these large companies that you're talking about. Because it seems to me that what you're advocating in the approach is going after these very kind of high profile targets at pretty large companies or influential companies at least. So I guess from your experience, have you seen people be able to do this kind of cold call approach?
Well, not everybody angel invests, right? So some of the, including CEOs that have exited, and have tens of hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes, they look at that vehicle and they say it doesn't work. I don't have analysts that can help me evaluate deals. I can't control the outcome of the deal. The company I angel invest, I don't have any real teeth in there because we haven't created a board of directors yet. They don't listen to me. I don't like angel investing. And angel investing is a way to blow my capital and put, $500,000 into the year for 5 years and have zero to little input. That is a common complaint in Southern California, executive and CEO community. Now, there's the other side of that, which is, their numbers of success are 1 in 1,000, and when you hit them, you ultimately need to be able to scale. So if you're looking back over a decade and you haven't invested in 10 deals a year over a decade and put $25,000 a pop, not $250,000 a pop, into this ecosystem, and you look back and you said, I had 1 in 100 that worked out, success, you've paid your money back, right? So now, out of 1 in 100 doing $100,000 a year in angel investing, saying I wanted to deploy $1 million over a decade into angel investments, you needed to play those economics and scale. The amount of time that you would need to look at and ultimately make 10 investments a year is fantastic, right? They don't have that. They're not even local that much if they're that wealthy. They're in San Tropez, or they're in Cannes, or they're in Barcelona, traveling around and having fun. So you're not cold calling when you ultimately reach out to the population, because that population of people that you'd want as your advisors would also fall through that. It's founders and CEOs of companies, it's CFOs of emerging companies, it's executives in corporate America that might have scale to it. But what you're doing is you're identifying all of the potential advisors. You haven't made that cold call yet. You're deliberately filtering that list to say, any one of the people that say yes on this list, assuming that I can get them interested, assuming that I can afford them, assuming that they end up telling me that they're local, because they might say on their LinkedIn that they live in LA, and I quickly reverse engineer it, and they're like, well, I actually live up in Santa Barbara, I don't live in LA, and I actually can't really help you as much as I thought. And assuming they're available, interested in this part of their career, you're deliberately networking with that population. And ideally, it should be beneficial for your business to deliberately network with influential people in that marketplace too. Now, the carrot you need to make those phone calls is you need the carrot of saying, I'm building an advisory board. I'm looking to find a way to compensate people that help our company. So I think you're in the driver's seat when you do it that way. Now, going to meetings and hoping that you meet the right people is kind of like job posting, right? You're like, did the right person at the right day show up at the right meeting, and did they see me? And when we were at the meeting, did I actually get over to them? And did I have a chance to introduce myself to them? If they end up being at that meeting and you would have started a relationship virtually prior to that, and then when you do see them and they say, oh yeah, we've talked on email, it's good to see you again. You've just accelerated the relationship to a point when you're at that meeting. You've invited them to an angel event. You're saying, hey, listen, we're going to pitch here, and you have a community of people that are following your company. So I think it's a tool, a retained search methodology that you should employ as the CEO and founders of a company to deliberately get your business in front of the right people instead of passively.
And let me rephrase my question a little bit. So is that the way you're attracting your first advisor or your second advisor, or is that once you've built up a couple other advisors, or does it?
It depends. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, you have to figure out, your first advisor is usually a big brand name that you want to trade on. So, put the list together of the most powerful people you can think of, and then go do the internet research and reverse engineer who the people are that you didn't know. And usually want a big brand, because then your story completely changes, which is, yeah, Elon Musk is on my advisory board. You didn't even tell me what you did. Right? I don't even know what your company does yet. You didn't even start with, we are, my name is. You led with the founder of SpaceX, PayPal, Tesla, and SolarCity has said, I will give you my time to give you advice. I didn't ask you how much you were paying him. I didn't, Now, if you can get Elon Musk to write you a check, the level of diligence Elon Musk might need to go through to get to that process might be prohibitive to him even spending that amount of time with you to make the decision. You might say, call it my venture fund. Or, you know what? I'm a limited partner at Greylock. Just call up Reid Hoffman and tell him I sent you and take a meeting. So now you're showing up saying, yeah, Elon Musk, did you meet with him? No. Did you have a conversation with him? No. Okay, so you're using his name and trading it. Now, hoping that you're going to get Elon Musk is a fool's errand if he's the only name on your list. If you had 25 names like that on your list because you went through the research of 300, if you removed people that you felt were unattainable, if you found a way to reach out to them in some sort of law of numbers success, and you ultimately got to, out of 300, 10 to 25 filtered and 3 to 7 potentials, you're in business. But again, the first advisor is probably a big name, or at least early on in your first few that you can trade on.
And for one more question.
Okay.
Is it more, you said the first advisor should be like a big name, but I'm wondering if it's more practical to have like a medium level advisor and use his relationship and to find a better one and keep finding them. Eventually they'll get a...
It's 6 one way, a half dozen another. I mean, I think you need the big name to change the fluidity of your pitch early on. And again, a big name isn't always, Elon Musk is a globally recognized powerhouse as a brand, right? A big name in our local market could be, let's look at the last 3 companies that were acquired here. Bursely, we got Bursely, let's just go with Bursely, Convertro, and Gravity, right? So you say I got Amit Kapoor on my advisory board. He just sold his company for $150 million to AOL. He stayed on at AOL to help build out the personalization division. He was the former COO and early executive at MySpace, and he went to Stanford. Oh, that's great. That's a great advisor. So it is, in somewhat, you're saying it's a big name. Now, the reason his name got a lot bigger than saying he's the CEO of Gravity is that in the last year, he sold his company for $150 million. So you need something like that early on. Now, there's a ton of evidence that says companies that didn't have advisory boards saw a tremendous amount of success. There's even evidence of companies turning down advisory relationships. Bill Gates invited Mark Zuckerberg to come see him, and Mark didn't take the invitation early on. He's like, no, I'm fine. No, they met later on, but he turned down his advice early on when he was at Harvard still. Yeah, and then I think we're done.
What's your experience with the responsiveness of educational or academic professionals to invitations to be members of advisory boards?
I think it's higher. Retired academic government don't see as many opportunities like this. They see the ecosystem and the community that they have. So obviously at an institution like UCLA, where you got 350 research centers, $1 billion of annual capital deployed within your own walls, and 1,800 inventions in the first email sent, you've got a tremendous amount of opportunity here. But that also means that you have a tremendous amount of students here. You have 25,000 students, and now the opportunity to come outside of that, which is you were you were a professor that I had, and now my business is scaled outside of my early expectations, and you've come back. I see that those opportunities are usually taken more aggressively by the educators, the government officials, and the politicians, and the retired community. The executives are trying to just factor in their time. They're just, they usually just turn down everything.